Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. I'm really glad you're here today because we've got a fascinating lineup of local news stories to look at. And when you place these stories side by side, they tell this massive, captivating narrative about California. We're going to be weaving together the state's rich historical foundations, its intense current political realities, and then a surprising demographic shift that is going to completely alter its future. By the end of this explainer, you'll have a really solid understanding of exactly where the Golden State has been, where it stands today, and where it's heading. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, reaching for the stars. Second, freedom and resilience. Third, preserving Black women's history. Fourth, the $356 billion budget battle. And finally, California's demographic shift. Part 1. Reaching for the stars. Honoring astronaut Victor Glover. We're kicking things off by celebrating some literal out-of-this-world progress. Just this week, the California State Capitol honored a true hometown hero right alongside their Juneteenth commemorations. And to really grasp the magnitude of his achievements, just look at this timeline. Victor Glover's journey is absolutely incredible. He was born in Pomona, California, got his engineering degree from Cal Poly back in '99. By 2001, he'd earned his Navy Wings of Gold as a test pilot flying FA-18 Hornets. NASA selected him for their astronaut corps in 2013, and looking ahead to April 2026, he is set to serve as the pilot for the historic Artemis II mission. That mission is taking 4 astronauts on a flyby around the moon, which marks the absolute farthest distance humans have ever traveled into deep space. I mean, from Pomona to the far side of the moon. How cool is that? But you know what really stood out at the Capitol wasn't just that incredible resume, it was his message. Lawmakers unanimously approved Assembly Concurrent Resolution 214, that's a measure commemorating Juneteenth, and Glover offered this really poignant thought. He said, let's focus on what brings us together rather than what tears us apart, and we'll get more done. Seeing both sides of the aisle come together to celebrate shared history and human achievement was, as he put it, a great reminder of what we're actually capable of as a people. Moving right along to Part 2, Freedom and Resilience, Bakersfield College's Juneteenth. That spirit of shared history takes us from the Capitol down to the community level, specifically to an event called Freedom, Family, and Fellowship, held at Bakersfield College. And this brilliantly illustrates the true historical context here. While the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, it wasn't actually until June 19, 1865, that Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas to enforce it, freeing the last 250,000 enslaved African Americans. The speakers at the college made this absolutely crucial distinction. Juneteenth isn't just a celebration of slavery ending, it's a celebration of resilience over slavery. It's about community building and perseverance. So, how do we turn that resilience into actionable steps for the future? Well, Compton College President Keith Curry gave a keynote where he laid out what he calls the Real Love Framework. It stands for responsiveness, accountability, learning, community alignment, and the removal of barriers. He made a powerful argument. If systems and structures are failing Black students, the burden is on the institutions to change, not the students. It's a direct demand for measurable outcomes and a flat-out refusal to just accept the status quo in education. All right, Part 3, Preserving Black Women's History, a Field of Beauty and Brilliance. Speaking of refusing to accept the status quo, our third story takes us over to Los Angeles to the A.C. Bilbrew Library. There's a stunning new museum exhibit there that's challenging the state to see Black women, as the curator put it, in full. The necessity of this exhibit was captured perfectly by Dr. Donna Nickel. She shared this deeply personal, eye-opening anecdote about her grandmother, Catherine Tarpley. Her grandmother was a USC-trained historian who helped open the very first cooperative food market in Watts back in 1980. But when the local papers covered the effort, they named every single man in the room and completely erased her grandmother from the record. Dr. Nichols said, "My grandmother was not the exception. She was the rule." And that is exactly why building an archive is so critical. If communities don't claim their space and tell their own stories, somebody else will. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer lineage of California Black women who literally built institutions from nothing. Just look at this list. We've got Biddy Mason, who won her freedom in an LA courtroom and went on to become one of the city's wealthiest landowners. Mary Ellen Pleasant, who actually sued to segregate San Francisco's streetcars. Charlotta Bass, a newspaper publisher and the first Black woman ever nominated for U.S. vice president. And Miriam Matthews, who assembled one of the most vital archives of Black California history. These aren't just footnotes, they are the absolute foundation of the state. Which brings us to Part 4, the budget battle, California's $356 billion reality. Okay, we're making a pretty sharp narrative pivot right now. We've been exploring the cultural foundations of California, but now we need to look at its fiercely divided present. The legislature just passed the annual state budget, and it is a massive, massive point of debate. Just look at that number, $356 billion. To put that into perspective, that is roughly $9,000 for every single person living in the state. This budget was intensely negotiated to try and tackle structural shortfalls, high inflation, and public needs across a truly massive state. If we break down the budget visually here, you can see where some of the biggest chunks of change are going. The legislature authorized a record $127 billion, going specifically to K-12 education and community colleges. They've also padded the state reserves with $36.5 billion to prep for any future deficits. And then the remaining $192.5 billion is distributed across healthcare, homelessness funds, and various other state programs. But hey, the numbers really only tell half the story, right? The political reasoning behind them is where the real debate is happening. So let's look at the Democratic rationale first. Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel explicitly rejected Governor Gavin Newsom's proposed cuts to social services. And why is that? Well, they argue that they have to shield vulnerable communities from anticipated federal spending cuts driven by the H.R. 1 Act in Washington. So their focus is heavily leaning on maintaining safety nets, things like ensuring full healthcare coverage through Medi-Cal and distressed hospital loans, especially during a time of such high inflation. On the flip side, Republicans have offered some sharp criticisms of this exact spending package. Senate Minority Leader Brian W. Jones argues that the state has basically become a playground for left-wing politicians. The Republican counterargument is that this budget involves way too much spending on the wrong priorities, like, as he puts it, green fleets over safe roads. And critically, they argue it totally fails to adequately fund Prop 36. That means they believe there isn't enough money allocated to handle the increased court workloads and mandatory drug treatments that voters just recently approved. So, as you can see, two very, very different visions for how $356 billion should be used. And finally, Part 5, California's demographic shift, a changing horizon. So while the politicians are battling it out over today's budget, there is a totally different, kind of startling new reality creeping up on tomorrow's population. A new report from the Public Policy Institute of California just revealed a demographic shift that will fundamentally alter everything we've talked about today. Check out the stark contrast in these numbers. To sustain a population without relying on migration, you need a replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. But in 2023, California's rate plummeted to 1.48. That is the lowest level on record. Now, a drop in teen birth rates is being heralded as a massive public health success, for sure. But the overall drop across all demographics, that signals an unprecedented shift in the state's entire trajectory. So the crucial point is understanding the chilling ripple effects this is going to have in the near future. Researchers project that by the year 2038, which actually, scratch that, it's just over a decade from now, deaths in California will literally outnumber births. We're looking at a projection of 630,000 fewer public school students. Think about how that completely changes how that massive education budget we just talked about will be spent. We're also looking at widespread labor shortages, a rapidly aging population that's going to put heavy strain on healthcare services, and a very likely loss of congressional representation on the national stage. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. We've seen California's incredible capacity to reach the stars. We've seen its deep-rooted resilience and its ability to manage hundreds of billions of dollars. But how in the world will California adapt its economy, its schools, and its very identity to a future where deaths outnumber births? It is a staggering question, and it's one that will absolutely define the next era of the Golden State. Thank you so much for exploring this data with me today, and I really encourage you to keep questioning the numbers behind the news. See you next time.